Wait a minute. This isn't the Kyrie video. Okay, I know, I'm sorry. I know the Kyrie video isn't done yet. I'm working on it, I swear. I was planning on having it out for March Caprice this year, but it turns out I actually couldn't submit the Kyrie video for March Caprice due to the event guidelines. And my other backups, one of them being another Kyrie video, requires just as much effort as the Kyrie video. So I couldn't do those either. So I decided to go with a submission that didn't require as much work and was something I still enjoyed. Talking about Dream Drop Distance. This video is in the spirit of the one key moment format, where people talk about a specific moment from the KH series that struck out to them in detail, the original playlist of which unfortunately no longer exists. The videos themselves are still up, and I've created a new playlist, so all the videos that I've found so far, including this video, have been added, so I suggest checking all those videos out. My video is longer than others, and expands past a single moment, however, as I cannot really talk about just one part of Dream Drop Distance's ending. This video will cover what I love about 3D's ending, from the Into Sora Slumber cutscene to the Ansem the Wise's Legacy cutscene, and the gameplay in between. This is one key sequence to show us the mark of mastery. One thing I want to emphasize before going into the ending is how well I think Dream Drop Distance handles referencing story elements from previous games. 3D is the first KH game in 7... Wait, really? Is it actually? Oh my god, of course it's actually 7. 7 years to properly move the story past this moment in KH2 where Sora receives Mickey's letter, and it's a game that also came out on the 10-year anniversary of the series. So not only did Dream Drop have the daunting task of weaving together the world-building BBS Days Encoded provided into Sora and Riku's story while moving their story forward, but also had to respect the 10 years of their story that led up to it. The concerns of accessibility of the series' story weighed on the minds of the team during 3D's development. Even now, 10 years after 3D, those concerns are still prevalent. We have an entire game that is mostly a recap, and KH3 itself spent a lot of time readdressing plot points throughout its own story, more than I personally would have liked. But Dream Drop does something that other games in the series have rarely done before or since. Reference an event offhand, and then move on. This isn't the case with everything in 3D, but it's incredibly refreshing to have a KH game that succinctly brings up a plot point from a previous title, respecting that the audience playing the Wait, no, you gotta be kidding me. How am I just realizing this? 7th major release in the 10th anniversary of the series probably knows what Riku means by a puppet replica of the shadows of my heart. But for those who don't, 3D gives a summary of the game where that plot point comes from that you can decide whether or not to read. You may not have the full context and all the nuance, but these summaries I feel give players who are unfamiliar with certain parts, or even the whole series, enough to not feel completely lost. Giving these summaries instead of going into lengthy detail in scene gives 3D's story and the story of the series as a whole time to breathe. It lets the audience appreciate the growth of the series and its characters without the growth being hammered into them.
And he opened his heart to darkness.
You still think that I'd rely on darkness?
And now you belong to the darkness.
You shall sink into the abyss!
I have given in to the darkness.
Or maybe I should fade back into darkness. I always seem to give in. That must be you from when Ansem had control of your heart.
Yeah. How could I forget?
Hey, do you remember how in KH1 Riku felt darkness? It also lets the audience who have been through this series long enough appreciate some of the more obscure references, like the ones brought up in 3D's ending. So let's start looking at that ending, shall we? Starting with the scene Into Sora Slumber, we begin with a direct reference to BBS, with Mickey and Yensid's overt comments to the parallels between Sora and Ben's sleeping states, and the more subtle parallels between Riku and Aqua with scene framing. I've mentioned in a previous video how often 3D draws parallels between Riku and Aqua, and this scene where Riku learns how to save Sora in a similar way and setting to how Aqua learned how to help Ven further strengthens that parallel. Like Aqua with Terra, Riku is willing to dive into the abyss to save one of his closest friends. But Mickey is concerned due to how that went for Aqua, and he doesn't want to lose another friend to the abyss. The rest of the scene is Riku explaining his decision to save Sora, and why he's okay with doing it alone despite the danger. What really shows Riku's growth here is that none of his reasoning is about proving himself like it was at the beginning of the game. Riku has well and fully faced his darkness and the consequences of his mistakes, accepted it all, moved on, and has come out of the test stronger, with a truer sense of purpose he had since he was a child, gaining strength to protect what matters. Riku is saving Sora because he heard Sora call for him before he fell into the abyss. Because Sora saved him when he couldn't go on after defeating Xemnas, and when he was lost in the darkness. Because Sora is his best friend. His best friend, who, just after deciding to make a raft to see other worlds, immediately went to sleep on the beach. If Riku doesn't keep Sora on his toes with a little healthy competition, then he's just gonna slack off again. Because what kind of Keyblade Master sleeps through his test? Riku takes us back through the series' history in just a few sentences, back to the very beginning when we, and Sora, first woke up on the shores of Destiny Islands, to the present moment, and we can feel the weight and history of every word. We feel that weight, that growth, even more when Mickey, Donald, and Goofy know that they're all connected, and that connection will light Riku's way to Sora even in the darkest abyss. A lesson they learned from their time in the Datascape. They've seen this play out. We've seen this play out when Data Sora debugged Data Riku. And seeing this reversal in Dream Drop Distance really hammers home how much Riku has grown, how much we've all been through with them, and makes us excited to join Riku to finally get to save Sora this time. Most of this scene is accompanied by KH2's Dearly Beloved, one of my favorite sound design choices in the series, of which I can only think of one better. The way this Dearly Beloved builds, and how that's paired with Riku's resolve and the support he gets from those around him as he makes probably the biggest decision of his life thus far, is immaculate. Both he and Sora could be lost in here. The portal to the abyss is inky black. Sora is way down there, but Riku has no fear, no hesitation. The camera pans and the music swells as Riku summons Wade's Dawn, not Soul Eater like the beginning of the game, and opens a portal to Sora's heart. This is the moment Riku becomes a true Keyblade Master, and KH2's Dearly Beloved pairs with this moment perfectly. The gameplay section that follows carries the gravity of Riku's choice from the previous scene, but shifts the tone with Tsuyoshi Sekito's arrangement of Destati called My Heart's Descent, a darker, more melancholy version of the Destati we've come to know. It goes well with this lonely dive where we see Sora's most important memories pass us by as we avoid anti-Soras that attack like, ironically, white blood cells attacking a virus. No, not that one. As we try to open the gate to Sora's heart. There's nothing particularly triumphant about this gameplay section, unlike the other dives. There's no fanfare once you get through, and it's not a difficult dive either, but it's another chance for the game to reflect upon the series' history. We've played as Sora for most of these games, so we have moments from the story that are near and dear to our hearts, but there's something moving about seeing what moments are important to Sora. I don't know why, but I get really emotional seeing Sora saying goodbye to Hayner, Pence, and Olette as one of his most important memories. But since we're playing as Riku in this section, one can't help but wonder how he feels about these memories. Riku has had a huge impact in Sora's life, so how does he feel about these moments, both good and bad, that Sora deems important as he dives? There's something about seeing the moment Riku took the Keyblade from Sora, fighting anti-Soras which Riku had once summoned to fight Sora, while playing as Riku, who is trying to save Sora, listening to a version of Destati that uses cello, an instrument so prominent in Riku's character theme that I would go so far as to call it Riku's instrument, that hits like a truck. I can't help but think of a line from Green Requiem's The Music of Dream Drop Distance that describes 3D as narratively but also musically be Riku's game throughout this section of the game. It further shows the growth Riku has experienced throughout the series, and potentially even the player's evolution of their opinions towards him. After that emotional sequence, we're then thrown into a boss fight so quickly, so out of left field that it leaves both Riku and the player going, "What?" I will admit, the Armored Ventus Nightmare is not my favorite boss mechanically. Due to visibility issues and the nature of its attacks, players often heavily rely on flow motion to get through the fight, which directly contradicts the intended design choice of the mechanic. The boss theme doesn't reference Ventus's theme or any other character theme since it's a repurposed dive track, and there's no explicit narrative implications from the boss itself, which all makes this boss feel a little rushed or slapped in. And indeed, the final boss of this game was originally intended to be young Xehanort, with the Armored Ventus Nightmare being added mid-development. So it seems that this boss was added in haphazardly as your final obstacle to wake Sora up. But if we take a deeper look at what the Armored Ventus Nightmare actually is, we see Riku's final test against his growth. I talked about this in my video analyzing Sora as a future villain of the series, but it's possible to view the Armored Ventus Nightmare as a boss against Sora. The Armored Ventus Nightmare is the corrupted armor Ven's heart encased Sora in as he fell to darkness, making the source of its power muddier than lingering wills, for example. It fights with Ven's moves but with Sora's Keyblade and Sora encased in the armor, making this more of a boss fight against a corrupted Sora than a lingering will or a typical nightmare. Put this back into the context that DDD is a game celebrating the 10th anniversary of the series, and Armored Ventus Nightmare looks less like a sloppy inclusion. In a series with 13... No, you can't be serious. 13 separate fights against some form of Riku up to this game. To have the final boss be against a corrupted Sora feels so surreal, yet so earned. This time, Riku finally gets to save Sora from the very power he once coveted. And it appears something else has seen Riku's growth, as the Kingdom Key leaves itself behind for Riku to use to open a path forward. If you recall from KH1, this keychain was originally supposed to be Riku's, so it seems that after all this time, Riku has finally proven himself worthy of this Keyblade. After Riku uses the power of waking, he finds himself on the Destiny Islands of Sora's heart, and immediately runs into Roxas, who asks,
What is it that you're so afraid of?
The gravity I felt in this moment as it referenced one of the questions from the Dive into the Heart tutorial from the first game was immense, and the audible gasp I had was admittedly embarrassing. Dream Drop Distance at the very end of the game is bringing the player full circle with just 3 questions. But the answers for the 3 asked by Roxas, Ven, and Xion are different from those of KH1. Because this isn't being asked of a Sora who's never been off of his island, this is being asked of a Riku who has, and has grown beyond his desires of a kid dreaming of seeing other worlds. There's a great segment in Bio Roxas' Psychology of Riku video, where he goes further in depth about these answers and what they mean to Riku, and I'll direct you there instead of me retreading ground that was laid better than I possibly could. What really interests me is again how this whole sequence brings the player in particular full circle. In KH1, the game starts with the player gaining a power that allows them to fight, using that power to defeat shadows, answer 3 questions, and fight a powerful monster. From there, we learn more about our protagonist Sora and what that dream meant for his future. Now, 10 years later, after learning so much about Sora and Riku, Riku uses his newfound power to dive into Sora's heart, and the player yet again battles shadows and a powerful opponent. Like in KH1, Sora is consumed by the darkness of this adversary, but the light left behind by the Keyblade allows Riku to progress further, allowing the player to answer 3 questions to wake Sora from the dream, and we return to see what this means for his and Riku's future. The series concludes this 10-year-long build-up to the final confrontation with Master Xehanort with this tutorial book ending, and I absolutely love it. But before we return to the Realm of Light, we have one last task, and one more character to discuss the growth of.
What's this?
You were not the visitor I expected.
Diz!
Ansem the Wise's reputation is complicated, I would say, among the fandom. Time and the growth of the series beyond KH2 has not been kind to Diz and his disdain for nobodies. Knowing now that nobodies can grow hearts, the gaslighting and abuse he puts Roxas and Naminé through comes off as incredibly cruel. But looking back on reports and scenes from 2, BBS, and Coded, a clearer picture begins to emerge of who Ansem was at the time he digitized himself. Or at least, someone he wanted to be. Ansem the Wise spent 10 years building up his plans for revenge against Xemnas, and he was willing to use anyone as a means to an end. Riku, Naminé, Roxas, Xion, and even Sora. His hatred for his 6 apprentices and their nobodies colors how he views 2 of the most unique ones. Ones born not out of a lust for power, but out of the sacrifices of love. But as we see in this scene with the digital Ansem, the real Ansem had realized that nobodies can have hearts when exposed to the ones around the world. He even mentions Roxas's heart connecting with Kairi's in KH2. Yet, we still see him torment Roxas and order the disposal of Naminé. We do, however, see small cracks in the walls around Ansem's heart on day 5, with him allowing Roxas to see the ghost train because he missed a trip to the beach, looking almost remorseful when he ordered Naminé's disposal, and from his final reports. This grows into full-on regret and a need for atonement by the end of the game, and it's that Ansem we see here in 3D, a man who is trying to make amends. The cause of this shift is seeing yet another sacrifice born from love. Riku taking on Ansem Seeker of Darkness's form and name so Sora could awaken. This is when Diz realizes the consequences of his actions. Xemnas won't be hurt by this, but the literal children he's been using as tools will. It's shameful, and Ansem can only laugh at himself. And while we don't see it, in hindsight we now know the steps Ansem took from then on to correct his mistakes. He digitized himself and the results of the research he finished right before Sora awoke, and created an encoder to trap Kingdom Hearts as data to stop Xemnas. The latter does not go as planned. The encoder explodes and Ansem seemingly dies before he can accomplish his goals. However, Ansem might have known that he wasn't going to make it through this battle. In Secret Ansem Report 13, written a day before Sora awakens, he writes as if he won't survive, wishing he could have talked with Mickey and returned to Radiant Garden if he could. It's as if he was writing from the heart instead of the mind, lamenting how too far gone he is in his quest for revenge, that the only way for him to atone is to take Xemnas down with him. With this context, it makes sense that he would assure that the truth he discovered in his research survived past him, so future generations could do and be better than him. But why hide it in Sora's heart? Why not give it to Riku or Mickey? What is it about Sora in particular that made Ansem entrust his presumably last wishes upon? Data Ansem mentions that Sora's return to human form was a statement to the love in his heart for other people, going on to say that this allows him to continue to see the good before the bad, continuing to see the world as beautiful despite all he's been through. Even when Sora does have low opinions of someone, it doesn't stop him from trying to make a connection. He tries to reason with Xemnas at the end of KH2, and even proposes in 3D that nobodies might have hearts. He will always grow, always continue to learn what's out there in the world. With an open heart and an open mind, Sora can connect with countless hearts, which allows him to draw strength from those connections to take the most damaged of hearts into his own until they can be restored. And the best way for Sora to do that is to be himself. Looking further into Ansem's reports and his final actions in KH2, it's clear that Ansem had a lot of respect for Sora. He describes Sora's extraordinary efforts to stop Ansem Seeker of Darkness and the organization, which led him to try to use Sora to take them down. But those plans fell apart when Sora acted on his own will, and Ansem realized he couldn't control Sora any more than the organization could. In his final moments, he accepts that his perceived knowledge of hearts amounted to nothing compared with that one boy's heart, and follows Sora's lead by listening to his heart, saving his friends instead of getting revenge. So the answer to the question of why Sora is answered with another. Who better than to entrust the research of a man who was consumed by hatred than a boy who was so full of love? Despite my opinions of Ansem souring even more over the years, I really appreciate how this scene uses a man once known as a sage to reflect on the series' philosophy about the connections between hearts, and why Sora is so important to that philosophy. This also doesn't complicate itself with a back and forth or background music. The camera panning to the nature on the islands, the sunset, our only two characters at key points, with only the sound of the waves as background noise. It's so quiet, so reflective, almost comforting. We're then brought back to the reality of what Riku was actually supposed to be doing in a moment that shows, of all things, a rare glimpse into the friendship Riku and Diz might have had. These two spent the better part of a year watching over Sora, and for the two of them to meet like this with the task of waking him up again is actually kind of funny. This moment feels like two old friends reminiscing over a story. Remember when Sora would constantly fall asleep? What were we supposed to do with him? It's small moments like this I personally really appreciate. Continuing with that thought, I want to dig into this line,
You can go home now.
I absolutely love the phrasing here because it's reminiscent of this line from the final Secret Ansem report. When all this is over, it is my fervent hope that he'll be able to return with Sora to his island. I've always read this line as Ansem hoping to see Riku home, actively working towards making that happen in his quest to atone for what he did to Riku. And while the encoder's explosion did allow for that, Ansem himself never got to see that happen, but this data version of him can. He can send Riku home, knowing that he helped him. And I don't think I would have made this connection without Corey Burton's fantastic work in this scene. He and the late Christopher Lee have done an amazing job at showing Ansem the Wise's emotional range. Speaking of, I really just want to praise David Gallagher's voice work in 3D for Riku real fast. He and the voice directors really understood the assignment when it came to this game, and it shows. Especially, again, in small moments like explaining why he's in Sora's heart, or the soft thank you he gives before leaving. Finally, I want to discuss this final exchange where Data Ansem asks for Riku's name. First off, it's strange that this Ansem, who is presumably a version right before Sora woke up and would definitely know Riku, doesn't know who Riku is. It would make sense if this Ansem was a personification of the results of his research, which from what we hear in KH3 is mostly Sora focused, that he only knows Sora. But as we've already discussed, this Data Ansem carries and talks about the feelings the real Ansem had, especially remorse around those he hurts, which would include Riku. This lack of clarity around Ansem's memory post-KH2 is also seen in Blank Points, where he has a strong recollection of his actions in Sora, despite just telling Aqua he didn't remember anything. And in KH3, Ansem very clearly knows everyone and what's going on, so Data Ansem having a foggy memory is nothing new for this plot point. I could explain away the Blank Points and the KH3 issues with Ansem regaining his memories by reminiscing about his memories of Sora, but we can't do that for Data Ansem. What we can do is present another possibility. That Data Ansem knew who Riku was all along, and was specifically referencing a moment in KH2 to give Riku the chance to show Ansem who he really is. The moment in question is when Diz asked Riku his name after he used Ansem's Seeker of Darkness's power to capture Roxas. Diz would obviously know this is Riku, but given that a few days after this moment that they talk about the holes in Riku's memory, it's possible the moment where Riku transformed himself had an effect on his memory. So this could be a moment where Diz was checking in on Riku, seeing if Riku really knew who he was. Regardless of the state of Riku's memory at the time, when Diz asked him who he was, he stated Ansem. And as we've learned, Riku resolved to live as Ansem, trapped within that darkness in order to help the ones he loved. When Riku said he was Ansem, he was saying goodbye to the person he used to be, despite his new identity being a lie. And as we discussed, this moment was a wake-up call for Diz, realizing what he had done to Riku. So this moment in 3D, where Diz had digitized and sacrificed himself, that data version asks the same question. What is your name? I don't think this is a case of foggy memory. I truly believe this is Ansem asking Riku if he knows who he is, if he's still unclear about who he's supposed to be, if Riku has grown. Riku, having finally overcome his struggles with Ansem's Seeker of Darkness, and the darkness within him, who dove this far down to the abyss to save Sora, knows who he is now. He's a boy who grew up on Destiny Islands, who met a traveler from another world, who played every day with his best friends and dreamed of seeing other worlds. He betrayed those friends, handed himself over to the darkness, atoned, and sacrificed himself for those same friends. He's a Keyblade builder. He's Sora and Kairi's best friend. He's Riku. He has always been Riku, no matter what form he takes. He knows that now, and Ansem the Wise knows it too. I love Dream Drop Distance's ending so much. I love how reflective it is, and the respect it has for the series, not just from a story perspective, but a gameplay one too. I love the music choices, the scene framing, the dialogue, the emphasis on Riku and Ansem the Wise, and how powerful Sora truly is. Every possible angle of it I love, and I didn't even really cover all of it. It's lived rent-free in my brain since I first played through it, and it always will. I hope I brought as much respect to these moments as I feel they brought to the series. This has been one key sequence to show us the mark of mastery. Hello! Rare camera appearance. Hi everyone. Thank you all for watching this video. Obviously I love talking about Dream Drop Distance a lot, so I appreciate y'all continuing to watch me talk about Dream Drop Distance. This video was super fun to make, and it gave me a deeper understanding of Ansem the Wise, which, I mean, I expected going into it, but I didn't expect exactly, like, how much I would actually almost like Ansem at the end of this video, which is, you know, like I said, my opinions of Ansem the Wise have definitely soured over the years, especially since this was written after my Kairi video script, and I am significantly less kind to Diz in that script. So if you're on the hate Diz train, look forward to that. So there will be an inconsistency of how I talk about Ansem here versus the Kairi video, which I promise I am still working on. If y'all don't know, I've had a pretty busy couple years, especially with my work. Game development is fun, guys. I'm okay. But also more prevalent to this event is that I actually joined March Caprice as a central staff this year, which was super amazing. I'm honored to have joined this amazing team. Really just to be able to work on an event that really got me back into connecting with the community. It means the world to me to be able to contribute to this event. So thank you to the central staff, my wonderful friends, everyone on the March Caprice staff for including me this year as one of your people running the event. Because I said staff too many times. But yeah, so if you're watching this actually during the March Caprice 4.0 event, make sure to check out the other submissions throughout the week. If you're watching this after the event, other submissions from this event will be in a playlist in the March Caprice channel, and I highly recommend checking them out. Every year, people put out amazing work, and this event is just, like I said, it's just amazing. Don't expect to not see more of me for this event. I've got a couple other submissions that I've helped out with, which is also super fun. And if you want to stick around, I got some bloopers because I had some good ones this year. So, yeah. Thank you again, and happy March Caprice. So this moment in 3D, after Diz had digitized, Diz would obviously know that this is Riku, but given that a few days after this— No! Shush! I can't help but think of a line from Green Requiem. I absolutely love the phrasing here, because it's reminiscent of this— Cars. It's reminiscent of Cars, the hit Pixar show. Show? Movie? Whatever.